It's late Thursday, March 23rd. That means you're probably listening to this on Friday, the 24th. But never mind that, because we have an absolute banger of a show for you here today. We hit on winners with Scott last week, and today we're going to sort of skew a little more negative to hit on some of the, quote, free agent losers. But more importantly, I want to unpack where the running back landscape stands after the main waves of free agency are over and gone, with a ton of dudes at that position switching teams. And to help us do that, we got a first-time guest alert. It's our friend, my friend, Faraz Siddiqi of Upper Hand Fantasy. What's going on, man? Welcome to the show.
I appreciate you having me, Matt. It's been a minute. We've been doing these draft shows, every year. But I'm glad to be on the show, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you've had me on your show several times, so it's way past due for me to extend you an invitation to this show here. So just before we get into all this, we do have a little bit of news to cover. Tell the people about like Upper Hand Fantasy, because you're not like me, one of these dorks that came up on Twitter. You've actually mastered basically all the other, and perhaps some people would say more important social media sites out there. So tell the people a little bit about you, for those who are not familiar, who come from my side of the dork community. Tell them about the cool kids and you at Upper Hand Fantasy.
Well, listen, man, if you talk to anybody who does follow me on social media, they will tell you I am a dork as well. So, I'm over on Instagram at Upper Hand Fantasy. We've been putting out content for, several years now. We got the Upper Hand Fantasy podcast going as well. So, that's what I've been doing for the past few years. But yeah, man, I haven't been on Twitter, for these last few years, but I'm trying to be wherever I can, and Instagram was a home for me. It still is, but I love doing things like this to kind of, make sure that I'm talking to smart people like you, and there's a lot of smart people out there, man, just in the community, all over social media, all over the internet. So, I definitely need to make sure that I'm staying up to date, staying in the midst of a lot of smart people.
Hey, no doubt, buddy. Well, wherever you are, everywhere you are, you're absolutely killing it. So I appreciate you joining me for this very, this is going to be a big time episode, like I said. So let's waste no more time. Let's get right into it. We do have a little bit of news to cover here before we jump into the meat of the show, starting with Elijah Moore has been traded to the Cleveland Browns. The Jets send Elijah Moore, a third-round pick, the 74th overall pick, to the Browns for a second-rounder. There's a lot of different value charts and stuff out there. But if you think about a draft day trade, teams that typically want to move from the third round to the second round, they might have to give up a future third, future second, something like that. So that's about the range that Elijah Moore went for. In my opinion, Faraz, the Browns wide receiver depth chart is wide open behind Amari Cooper. I think DPJ, Donovan Peoples-Jones, he's pretty good player, but he's just a guy. And you know this from our draft shows together. I am a certified, no doubt about it, Elijah Moore backer. So are you going to talk me out of getting really excited about this potential fresh start, or are you with me on being excited here?
No way, dude. I'm with you. I remember you coming onto my show. We talked about Elijah Moore. We were both, in agreement in terms of what he might profile in terms of him coming into the NFL. And, he didn't disappoint his rookie year. That's for sure. Yeah. Second year, it's funny, man. I'm not going to lie. I saw your reception perception report on Elijah Moore, and I saw that, this second year wasn't that bad. And you mentioned Brandon Ayuk. And before even seeing that, I was saying that he has the potential to have a Brandon Ayuk type of career arc, just because it was so similar, right? The rookie year, he had a great season. So you're kind of projecting him to maybe take a second year jump. Both of those guys go into the coach's doghouse their second year. And then Brandon and you kind of making a career resurgence now. And now that Elijah Moore is on a new team with what he calls a legit quarterback now, I think Elijah Moore can potentially take that next step in his third year, kind of reaching closer to the potential that we thought he would see.
Yeah, I know I said this I might have said it on this show. I know I said it on a different show recently, that when these guys like Ayuk, and you mentioned in the RP profile, I made that comparison. When these guys like that get into beef with their team, you kind of have to level set expectations all the way back at the bottom. obviously what they showed before, the talent, that's important. That's kind of the most important thing. But them getting back into the good graces of a team, I think, is the most important thing. We started to see it a little bit with the Jets last year, but I think a fresh start is probably best for all involved here. I think the Jets end up getting a pretty decent draft pick back, and we'll talk about their core in a second. And then Elijah Moore gets a fresh start to potentially be that wide receiver too. From a fantasy perspective, it's going to be, I mean, it's just going to come down to like, is Deshaun Watson better than, the form that he was last year? And as an Elijah Moore guy, I don't love to be in the position of like, I got to root for Deshaun Watson to be so much better than he was last year. But, that's a whole nother conversation. But I'm with you that in terms of like potential landing spots, this is actually probably better than him competing in a crowded room back in New York. This is probably a better situation for him.
Yeah, I think I would agree. Just because it's similar to what happened with Brandon Cooks. Obviously, Brandon Cooks is is a much more established wide receiver going to Dallas as the clear number 2 there. Elijah Moore, a lot of people might think that DPJ is that guy, but I think we kind of saw DPJ's ceiling last season.
Me too.
Right, and that's kind of who he is. So he might take a step down a little bit. He'll still potentially be that deep threat for Deshaun Watson. But if you look at that offense now, I'm hearing rumblings that they really want to make this a Deshaun Watson centered offense. And, if that happens, like, look at their weapons now. Elijah Moore, Amari Cooper, DPJ, running those deep routes. I mean, DPJ brings a lot more value than just catching the ball, right? He stretches the field. So there's a lot of value there. And you have David Njoku as well with Nick Chubb out of the backfield. So this is a pretty interesting offense. And like you said, it all depends on Deshaun Watson kind of returning back to, somewhat of his former self.
Yeah, and maybe I'm not trying to paint Watson as like a sympathetic figure here, obviously, the whole thing, but like with a full off season with the team, all of the, legal off the field stuff like behind him theoretically probably could be a little bit more better this year from that perspective. So I've been saying that the Browns sneakily were one of these teams to add like a big time wide receiver. I think they sniffed around Jerry Jeudy. I think they might have called about DeAndre Hopkins. I think this is actually probably a better move long term. Let's talk about the Jets, because meanwhile they signed Mecole Hardman for 1 year up to Faraz. Up to has to be like the phrase of the offseason. Every damn insider is out here like, this deal's up to $6.5 million. Who cares? I mean, he's probably not going to be making no $6.5 million. You know what I mean? So he joins a wide receiver room of Garrett Wilson, Allen Lazard, Corey Davis. I still think he's like a for now guy. There are also some pretty solid whispers from Jeff Darlington that Odell Beckham, who Rodgers openly said on Pat McAfee he wants to play with, that signing could be imminent. And call me crazy, man, but I kind of think this team would need Odell Beckham at this point, because that wide receiver room to me is like, it's aight. Like, it's aight, but it's not great anymore.
I agree. And listen, I'm going to let the cat out of the bag. I am a Jets fan. So I'm going to try to be as, I don't want to let my Jet fandom all the way out here. I was pretty upset with the Elijah Moore trade, to be honest with you. I didn't think the Jets got back what they could have got back for him, but it seems like they just want to, let him get a new start, just move on, right? But yeah, man, I agree with you. I think Allen Lazard, like, it's really about Aaron Rodgers, that signing, right? Like, that's all it was. And I'm okay with it if Aaron Rodgers does become a Jet. It really depends on what, they give up for Aaron Rodgers for a potential 1 year,
right.
The 1 year before he retires. But yeah, I agree with you. I think OBJ, would be coming in and he would take that receiving core to the next level, because without Elijah Moore, you don't really have a lot of separators there outside of their number 1 wide receiver, Garrett Wilson, right? And that's my issue. These guys don't seem like fits to me. Allen Lazard doesn't seem like a fit in this type of offense. So this really is just an all-out play to get Aaron Rodgers at this point.
Yeah, I'm with you that these guys like Lazard, I think, is a pretty good player. Nobody has enjoyed me talking about receiver blocking this offseason, but I will continue to say he's a great blocker, really brings a lot of pop in the run game there. But not a guy. Corey Davis, same way, not a guy who gets open a ton. Mecole Hardman is not he's like more of a gadget receiver. He's not like running big boy routes and stuff like that. So Beckham, in terms of landing spots for him, I know there are others, but that would actually be a pretty interesting one. I think pairing up with Rodgers there, and it would definitely just give them a little bit more pop that they need in the receiver room. Let's talk about another piece of news item here. Yeah, again, about your Jets potentially. According to Adam Schefter, Ezekiel Elliott has narrowed down his options about where to play to the Jets, the Eagles, and the Bengals. He would like to make a decision about where to sign by the end of next week. So that could, I guess, happen at any time. Faraz, it would be downright hilarious for a bunch of fantasy analysts who've gotten so excited about Rashad Penny signing with the Eagles. We'll talk about that in here in a second, only for Zeke, a guy who's basically become like persona non grata in the fantasy industry, to come in and take the exact workload that people were excited about with Rashad Penny. But where do you want to see Zeke land, if it's with these three teams or anyone else out there?
I don't want to see him land anywhere, dude. I just want him to retire. I'm a fan, dude. Wherever he goes, he's going to steal those touchdowns from somebody who we wish would get those touchdowns, right? Like Rashad Penny signing with the Eagles, see, with Rashad Penny, it's like, all right, you know what I'd rather them do? I'd rather than just, I don't think they're going to go into the season with Rashad Penny just hoping and, praying that Rashad Penny's going to stay healthy, right? I would love to see him be an RB1 and stay healthy, their RB1 and stay healthy, but if they draft somebody on day 2, that could make sense going into the season with someone like that and Rashad Penny. And then Rashad Penny could potentially get some opportunity if that back gets hurt. But I don't want it to be Zeke, man, because Zeke, I don't see a situation where like he doesn't stay healthy all year. Like he can, but he just won't be efficient. And then it'll just kind of like tear that backfield apart. But yeah, I don't want to see that with the Jets. Breece Hall already said it himself. I think he deleted his tweet. He asked Michael Carter on Twitter.
Like, we're good.
Said, hey. He said, "Hey man, are we good?" And then Michael Carter responded, quote tweeted, and said, "Yeah, I think so." So I'm not sure if Zeke is going to end up a Jet, but we'll see what happens, man. I don't see a landing spot where I would be happy from a fantasy point of view.
The OBJ, Aaron Rodgers, Ezekiel Elliott team would have been pretty awesome like 5 years ago. This version of it's a little bit jumping. Like I think adding Zeke is jumping the shark. I can get the Beckham thing, obviously the Rodgers thing, more than defensible, but Zeke, like we're pushing a little bit. I do think of these three teams, Eagles would probably be best if you're really hoping that, Zeke plows in 15 touchdowns, if that's your thing. And I think Zeke's not washed. Like I think he can give you something. And for that reason, I actually think the Bengals are my favorite spot here, because I still think there's a chance they move on from Joe Mixon. And I saw Joe Goodberry. I know you're shaking your head over there, but I saw Joe Goodberry, who's, followed the team forever. He was talking about him as like a potential Samaje Perine replacement. I think that's like defensible for Zeke.
I think so too. The reason why I don't want that to happen is because I don't know if Mixon's going to be on the team, right? He might, he is a potential cut candidate. There's nothing written in stone there. But if he weren't on the team, Samaje Perine's gone. That is a great landing spot for one of these rookies, one of these on day 1 or day 2. So I would love that landing spot. There aren't a lot of landing spots, in the NFL at this point where a team drafts a running back round 1, round 2, round 3, where you're like, wow, that's awesome. There will be zero ambiguity, right, on the Bengals. So like that's what I love, right? That's an easy analysis right there. Hashtag analysis, right? That would be awesome. It would make my job easier, but I guess I'm just being a little selfish.
No, well, here's the deal. Some rookie comes in there, Zeke's on the roster, Mixon's out of the mix. You've got Zeke doing what he does. That guy would just be Tony Pollard. Like he'd be the 2022 version of Tony Pollard, whoever that rookie is. Hopefully he's as good as Tony Pollard, and he's the early down guy. He's getting a little bit of passing down work, but not quite as much as you want. And Zeke is just taking the carries inside the 5-yard line, and he's, plowing in again, probably 8 touchdowns with the Cincinnati Bengals, bare minimum. I actually think it would be more annoying for Joe Burrow, who was sneakily a rushing threat last year. Like I kind of think that Dak could potentially have his best rushing season, especially from a touchdown perspective, in years with Zeke not in their mix. And then, Burrow was sneaky rushing and around the goal line there. That would be kind of a big downgrade for him. But I just think the Philly thing would be absolutely hilarious for the whole fantasy side of it. But I agree. There's no great landing spot.
It really would. That would be hilarious.
Another thing here, Ian Rappaport says the status of Cardinals wide receiver DeAndre Hopkins as it comes into focus. Talks are ramping up among the interested teams. Similar to Brandon Cooks, a trade would likely mean an altered contract. A few landing spots have dried up. We talked about Cleveland. You'd imagine Dallas is probably out after trading for Brandon Cooks. So where do you want to see DeAndre Hopkins land?
Buffalo or the Chiefs. I mean, those are like it's funny because those are literally the two best offenses in the NFL in desperate need of a wide receiver, right? Behind Stephon Diggs, they really don't have any wide receiver who is capable of taking this offense to the next level. DeAndre Hopkins would clearly be that guy, right? And honestly, like if one of these teams should step up, because all that means is that the other team would probably get DeAndre Hopkins, right? So you kind of killed 2 birds with 1 stone. The Chiefs, Listen, I think they're trying to test Patrick Mahomes here to see how good he really is. They're just trying to take weapons away from him every single year. Can you do it again? Can you do it again? And
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if he does it again. You know what I mean? Like just with Travis Kelce and what he has right now. But at the end of the day, like if I can see him paired up with Stephon Diggs, those two guys, on the outside, that would be fun to watch.
Yeah, I mean, you just put him in the Gabe Davis role from last year. Maybe not as much of a field stretcher. You're definitely going to use Gabe as like a situational deep threat, but man, Hopkins getting jump balls, stuff like that, contested situations, even some of the crossing stuff with Josh Allen, that would be great. But definitely, if you look at the Chiefs, as much as Gabe Davis and now it's Hardy there with the Bills, man, the Chiefs like need a lot of help, the wide receiver. I mean, obviously it probably doesn't matter, like you said, with Patrick Mahomes, but Sky Moore, I still think could be a decent player. His rookie season definitely leaves a lot to be desired. I think Kadarius Toney gives you pop as sort of a Mecole Hardman replacement. Sky Moore probably steps into the old JuJu role, and I think he could be pretty good in that spot. But I mean, do we really need like 120 targets for MVS? Like, I think we can get a better outside receiver option. I think that obviously Hopkins would be great. I think either of these spots are Beckham landing spots as well.
Yeah, I agree. I would love to see Odell Beckham in, more than the Jets, to be honest with you. Like I'm a Jets fan, but from a fantasy perspective, I would rather see him with paired up with Patrick Mahomes. I think they could. I think OBJ could have a miraculous year as long as he can stay healthy. Obviously, that's the big elephant in the room when it comes to him. We haven't seen him healthy in years now, but apparently he looked good. Like what was it, a week ago when he had that workout? So I think with Patrick Mahomes, he could do wonders. Unlike, we'll talk about JuJu later, but unlike, Patrick Mahomes needs that number one wide receiver outside of Travis Kelce, to be honest.
Yeah, I think they'll still draft and develop a few guys. If I'm them, I'm throwing like a second, third round pick at a pass catcher, tight end, wide receiver, regardless, like basically every single year. Pretty like a low grade version of what the Colts used to do with Peyton Manning, where it's like, we know Manning's like one of the GOATs, but just throw a first round pick at a receiver every now and again. Sometimes you get Reggie Wayne, sometimes you get Anthony Gonzalez, but regardless, like you just get some guys in here and try to make it happen. A couple of depth dudes. Damian Harris signed a 1-year deal with the Bills, but I want to save him to talk about later in the meat of the show. A couple other depth signings here. Isaiah McKenzie to the Colts, Ronald Jones to the Cowboys, Dearness Johnson to the Jags, Austin Hooper to the Raiders. All these are 1-year deals, I believe. So any of these stand out to you as potentially fantasy relevant, or like, okay, come on, keep it moving. We don't need the news alerts on for these guys.
No, not really. These guys aren't. It is. I think it is notable that he'll. JaMycal Hasty is probably the number 3 now, right, behind Travis Etienne. So a guy who you could potentially pick up on waivers, at some point in the season if Etienne were to get hurt.
All right, let's move on to the free agent losers here. Again, we're going to do a big thing on running backs here in just a second, but let's start off with some of these pass catchers, man, because, I can't have a whole show just full of running backs. Like, we got to talk about some receivers here. You nominated Chris Godwin and Mike Evans as a loser, and I think that one's pretty easy to understand if you just go to Buccaneers roster and sort by QB.
100%. And you would have hoped that the Bucs, would get one of these quarterbacks potentially, in the free agent market. Tom Brady obviously not there anymore. And you would hope that they would get somebody else besides Baker Mayfield, right? Like Godwin was great last year. Mike Evans, he didn't really come through for a lot of the season last season. And now we have to depend on Kyle Trask and or Baker Mayfield. One, we have no idea what to expect. The other, we know exactly what to expect, and that's not a whole lot. And you saw what the Bucs did last year. They led the NFL in pass attempts, right? And we saw the output. It wasn't amazing. Godwin was fine. Evans wasn't great. And like for me, like these two guys are ballers, right? Like there is a price I'm willing to pay for these guys. Like right now, I see Godwin's ADPs at the wide receiver 30. Evans is at wide receiver 34. So I feel like, especially Godwin, I feel like that's a little low for me. Maybe the consistency might be an issue there, but I think there is a potential for him to have his game. So that's a little low for me. But at the end of the day, like without a legit quarterback right now, which I feel like they don't have, it's really tough for me to buy them and hope for any sort of upside.
I think Evans, especially because I love Mike Evans. He's one of my favorite receivers of the last era, but I would be okay thinking like, all right, he had a year that was not a disaster from an individual reception perception standpoint, but was definitely a tick down from what we've expected. And they just ran him on so many damn vertical routes last year with Brady, who wasn't holding on to the ball. It was like a doomed marriage there. I would be willing to maybe get back into the Mike Evans business if it wasn't Baker Mayfield and Kyle Trask. And like, maybe Kyle Trask is a dude, but I don't know that I want to take that risk. I have no idea. Godwin's going to be the tough one for me, Faraz, because I am like an addict when it comes to, all right, discounted baller, discounted dude like Chris Godwin, who, by the way, is coming back from a torn ACL last year. Like, the second year back is almost always better than the first year back. I am like an addict when it comes to taking those guys when they fall in drafts, but this looks like a pretty clear situation to me where I can look myself in the mirror and be like, don't do this. And you're helping me a little bit kick my habit here.
I think so. Godwin's, he's going to be playing out of the slot, most likely, on most plays. So, I think it's one of those things, and I learned a lot of this from you where, he's going to be going up against linebackers, safety, a lot of zone coverage. And I think he might end up being a safety blanket for, whoever the quarterback is. We know who Baker Mayfield is. And I'm just hoping that the quarterback is Kyle Trask, just because there's a glimmer of hope, just a glimmer.
Yeah. Yeah, the only thing I would say that might be good for Mayfield and Godwin is that Godwin sort of is like a souped up version of Jarvis Landry. And that was the guy that in Cleveland, Mayfield was able to kind of glom onto a little bit because he just can't make difficult throws outside the numbers. He can't anticipate, guys from the outside running in breaking routes, but like a guy just doing a little route to the flat, stuff like that. He can hit that with a Chris Godwin type. So we could be looking at another like 90 catches for 850 yards and six to seven touchdowns with Chris Godwin if Mayfield started a full season. But my God, if Mayfield starts a full season, please don't give that to us, football guys. Let's move on to Jakobi Meyers here, who I'm going to push back a little bit on you with this one, but you had him on the free agent losers here. Why is that?
Yeah, I was looking forward to Jakobi going somewhere, where he can at least compete, as a 1A or a 1B, with, he had 24% target share, 22% target share over the last two seasons. But, if you're going to compete with Davante Adams, who's probably going to get like 30%, once again, like regardless of the quarterback, right? Like, he's going to be gobbling up majority of that target share. And on top of that, it's not like they have a quarterback who, could elevate a wide receiver too, right? And then you have Darren Waller. Obviously, him being traded helps Jakobi's situation for sure from a target share perspective. But what is Hunter Renfrow going to command? Like, is it possible that we see a 2A, 2B situation, right? If Renfrow continues to run out of the slot, right? We've seen Jimmy G favor the slot a ton. And, Jakobi, he could run out of that flanker role, most likely, in this situation. So I don't know if Jakobi's going to end up seeing that sort of target share that he's been used to, between that 22 and 24% target share behind Davante Adams. That is my concern with him, where he could have landed in a spot where, first of all, I'm surprised he got paid so little. I thought he was going to get paid a lot more. And he ended up going to a spot where, obviously, I think up against, like, if you're lining up opposite Davante Adams, you're going to be open a lot more, right? But I just don't know if he's going to play the majority in the slot like he did in New England. That could be Hunter Renfrow's role, unless we've been hearing some rumors about the Raiders making another move at wide receiver. And if they do, that might mean Hunter Renfrow is also on the move. So there could be some shuffling parts here. But that's kind of how I'm feeling. Like, I just think that Jakobi could have had a better landing spot this offseason.
I definitely think it could have been better. I'm just not sure that this one is so bad. Like, Joey, I hear you that he's definitely not going to have like a 24% target share, most likely, because, Davante Adams getting what he's going to get. I think that, look, Jimmy Garoppolo he gets dumped on sometimes, but he's more than good enough to feed 140 like targets to Davante Adams, and they can be pretty solid targets. I think Adams is more than he's going to have that same role that he did last year. Him on intermediate routes, that'll be fine with Jimmy Garoppolo. But Jakobi Meyers, I think what's interesting last year, and I know this because I like Hunter Renfrow. I think he's a fine player, but they were playing like Mac Hollins in two receiver sets over Hunter Renfrow. I'll never let that go because Mac Hollins is a special teamer and he's out there playing like legit snaps. But I'm not. I guess in order for Renfrow to really eat into Myers' target share, Josh McDaniels might have to do like a different type of offense than we've seen him do lately, which is, a lot of fullbacks, a lot of like two tight end sets, stuff like that. If they want to be a pure 11 personnel team, they're going to have to remove the fullback from the equation for the most part. They're going to have to remove that second tight end from the equation a decent bit. Otherwise, we could be just basically looking at, we're taking Matt Collins out of this mix and we're putting Jakobi Meyers into that role, which I think will garner more targets and obviously be more efficient than even what he was seeing in New England there from that volume perspective. So I don't think Meyers is like going to be a great fantasy pick or anything this year, but I love the fit with Jimmy Garoppolo, because I mean, if you've seen the route charts for Jakobi Meyers, digs, curls, slants, crossers, that's like Jimmy Garoppolo's favorite routes. That's all that is right there.
No, I love that. I love that insight, honestly, because I was hoping that he would go somewhere where he could have some fantasy value. Like, I was like, dude, this guy could potentially be, a high end wide receiver 3, every single week, depending on his landing spot. I don't know if I see that in his cards this year. Like, where do you think his ceiling can be from a fantasy perspective? Like, where, like on a weekly basis, like what could his ranking be? From if you're looking at it super optimistically.
I think super optimistic he would still be like a low end 2. I think absolutely best. So really, I mean, not too much different than what we saw last year, but
which is not bad.
Not bad, yeah.
And if you're talking about he could be a top 24 fantasy wide receiver, that's pretty good.
But that's from a ceiling perspective. I think most like that's Jimmy Garoppolo clicks in this offense, plays an entire season, which we haven't seen him do ever. And everything kind of comes together. Because this is the fascinating part about this Raiders offense to me is it's so hard to defend, because there's a reason. I mean, Josh Jacobs is a baller, but there's a reason that he was so awesome last year, because everybody just plays cover 2. Everybody, tries to bracket coverage. Devontae Adams, he's one of the true coverage dictators in the NFL, especially with the way that they use him as like an intermediate route player. There's no extra safety coming down to the box against Josh Jacobs. This is light boxes for days. And Jakobi's such a good zone beater. He's such a good, like, off the ball flanker receiver, as you mentioned. Those opportunities, like I said, I think could be a lot more efficient than what we're used to seeing him get in New England, which is not a very high bar to clear.
I love that. Now, I do want to ask you this, like, obviously, there was a switch, right, in terms of like that receiver in New England.
Yes.
I think you were just getting to that. We could get to that right now, actually. Go ahead.
Yeah. I was just going to say, speaking of New England, they basically swapped out Jakobi Meyers for JuJu Smith-Schuster. JuJu, I feel like we've probably talked about him on shows before. I think my JuJu stance. So I'm not going to disagree with you here that he is definitely a fantasy loser in this process. That New England offense is another one where I'm looking at it like, my God, they could really use a legitimate X receiver. And I don't see them getting into the Hopkins mix anymore. I don't think Judy's that guy. So what do we think of JuJu in New England?
I didn't understand it because he got the same contract. He got the same exact contract as Jakobi Meyers, and then Jakobi Meyers also was confused apparently on Twitter, and he voiced that displeasure too, saying, "Hey, like I could have stayed," a type of tweet. So I want to hear from you. I was really going to ask you, to be honest with you, like between these two guys, like I think Jakobi Meyers is the better wide receiver. I know that JuJu is a pretty good zone beater out of the slot, but at the end of the day, like 18% target share last year on a team that gave you all the opportunity in the world to garner a majority of the targets, right? There was no competition, right? For the most part on the Chiefs last year. You had Patrick Mahomes. Now you have Matt Jones, right? And, Jakobi Meyers, he got the target share. And I don't know that JuJu gets the same type of target share that Jakobi did. I'm not interested in JuJu this year. Like, even if he goes into the season as the projected number 1 wide receiver for New England, like I don't know, like that I could trust that. Like you just had Patrick Mahomes, man. Like and you couldn't get it done. And Kadarius Toney comes in and he's getting targeted at a higher rate, per route run than you are. It's a little bit concerning for me.
He's definitely just such a limited player. I mean, Jakobi Meyers is one of these guys in RP that's above 70% success rate versus man, which is a good indicator that in addition to being in the slot, you could play on the outside. Because from a zone coverage perspective, they're pretty similar. From even like the routes that they're good on, pretty similar. The slant route, the curl route, the dig route, kind of what I just said, flat route a little bit too. But Jakobi will occasionally give you like a big deep crosser or a big deep over post route type of situation, whereas you're just not going to get that with JuJu. I think we all at this point know that his 2018 was like the biggest fake news production season of all time for JuJu Smith-Schuster there with the Pittsburgh Steelers. But I'm with you, man, that like I think the only reason they probably made this move is, for one, like draft status haunts you forever. I mean, our guy Austin Eckler's out here like not able to get the payday that he probably deserves at this point because of the consistent undrafted status that follows you around. Jakobi was an undrafted guy, even by this organization that brought you in. Like, it just takes forever to really recoup that status. JuJu brings you, again, drink, a little bit more blocking. He brings you a little bit more of ability to set the edge in the middle of the field. He's probably a better contested catch receiver, definitely a better yak receiver. So I think you're trading off a little bit of route running prowess for some of that stuff. And if the Patriots just really want to double down into sort of the run heavy kind of physical identity, I guess that would be the justification for JuJu Smith-Schuster. But everything I just said doesn't equal a lot of fantasy success.
Well, the Patriots haven't really been the poster child for good wide receiver evaluation lately.
No, they have not. They're really hoping, and I'm not so sure they're going to get it, like a big jump out of Tyquan Thornton in their second year. I don't know, man. That's an interesting one. I think they got to be, at this point, if they're not going to trade for a Hopkins type, if they're not going to be able to recruit Odell Beckham, and I don't think they're trading for Hopkins because Bill O'Brien's the offensive coordinator there. So, like, that's definitely not going to happen. But they're going to be looking back to the draft again for wide receiver help. That is not, as you mentioned, gone very well of late.
It has not. It has not. So, listen, I'm not rooting for him. I'm a Jets fan. So I'm hoping it continues the way it has been.
I mean, Bill's just like kind of coasting out the end of the career here.
Pretty much.
Just playing. He's just throwing at the wall and seeing what sticks. I think it's like at the end of the career. Why not? You're going to go down as one of the best ever. You're going to get the record for most wins ever. I think at some point here, you just got to keep sticking around, going 8-8 until that happens, or 8-9 at this point, 9-8. Oh my God, I can't believe I just messed up the 17 game schedule. It's been 2 years, Matt. You got to get that together. Yeah, I got one here. I nominated these guys. Just about every Broncos player I kind of think is a loser in fantasy. For one, we'll get to Javonte Williams later. We'll break that down a little bit. But from the passing game perspective, I think that you look at the moves that they made early in free agency to sign a bunch of offensive linemen, to sign Chris Manhertz, who's a tight end, but really is just an extra offensive tackle because all he does is block. What a great name for a blocking tight end, by the way. I think we always like Manhertz. I wish my name. I like Harmon, but like Manhertz, that really tells you something there. They clearly want to run the ball with Sean Payton. They clearly want that to be the identity of the team. So I can't really get too excited about Russ from that perspective. And I wasn't really trying to get excited about Russ. The fact that they weren't able to move Jerry Jeudy or Courtland Sutton, I think these guys are probably a little bit overhyped by like the fantasy community and really the NFL community as a whole. The fact they weren't able to move one of those guys, and that might still happen, but I think the asking price is too high. I could see myself getting excited about them if they weren't on the same team, but because they're on the same team, because there's run first potential identity here, I got a tough time calling anybody in Denver like a winner from this process.
Yeah, no, I totally understand that. And, Sean Payton going there, I think he's going to, like you said, I think he's going to fix Russell Wilson by just running the ball. And I think that's what's going to happen there. And, low key, Samaje Perine signing, it's an interesting one to me because the Saints have, I think it was like for like 10, 11, I don't know, 15 straight. I don't remember what exactly it was, but like it was a long time where all that they had was a top 2 fantasy running back backfield in fantasy. So it's one of those situations. You got to pay attention to Perine a little bit because he can get a lot of those dump offs. Remember, Mixon came off the field for Samaje Perine in Cincinnati on passing down. So he's a guy, he could block. He can catch the ball out of the backfield. So he could potentially be one of those like Jags, who ends up being pretty fantasy relevant, in a Sean Payton offense. And especially with Javonte Williams coming off that ACL, he's someone who's interesting to me. I have a feeling the Broncos still might look into the draft for one of these versatile, running backs in the middle rounds, potentially, maybe like a Kenny McIntosh or Evan Hull later, someone like that. But yeah, I hear you, man, with Jerry Jeudy and Courtland Sutton. The asking price with Jerry Jeudy was apparently a first round pick. So that's probably why teams, haven't been, happy to grab Jerry Jeudy there. So I'm with you, man. I don't know if Russell Wilson is fixable, especially in 1 year, one offseason, with Sean Payton. It might take another year if it ever happens. But, it's an interesting situation. We'll see. KJ Hamler just tore his pec. He's going to be out 4 to 6 months. So they need a third wide receiver there. It's going to be interesting to see, man. A lot of hype around
Tim Patrick is coming back, too. Tim Patrick is coming back. It's worth remembering. But Tim Patrick has to be like the best, like he, according to like any Broncos beat writer, he's like literally the best receiver that's ever played football. And I'm kind of like, look, I get it. Tim Patrick's seems like a good dude. He's a hell of an underdog story, but like every Broncos beat writer talks about Tim Patrick as if he is like, I think it's a little bit, I talk about myth making all the time on this show and other shows. It's like, we double count stuff, it's like, oh, Patrick is this real underdog and he's done this, like, then it's like he's people then hype him up for more than he is. But it is worth noting he is coming back into this mix as well.
They're hyping him up like, Courtland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy don't exist. Like they're on this team too. Like he's not going to be their number one wide receiver. I know exactly who you're talking about, what you're talking about. But Greg Dulcich too. Like, everyone's also Greg assuming Dulcich, that with Sean Payton coming back, coming into Denver, that like this miraculously, Greg Dulcich is going to become this extremely fantasy relevant tight end. Like I get it. Like I think he's a decent dart throw, in your draft, like later on in the double digit rounds. But, you got to keep in mind that like the guy that killed it with Sean Payton was somebody who was already really good, right? Jimmy Graham, right? Yeah. And he had a couple really, really good tight ends, and those are the ones that popped off. I think Dulcich has a lot of potential, but we got to like kind of calm down a little bit when it comes to projecting in a ridiculous, second year for a tight end, where normally you kind of have to wait a couple of years for those big seasons from that position.
Kind of tough that we just outlined a lot of mouths potentially to feed. We're not sure any of those guys is like a really big needle moving talent. The quarterback is a question, and they want to run the ball a lot. Like that's not a good mix there for fantasy success. So I think that's why we're both kind of down on this situation, except Samaje Perine, who again we'll talk about later. But you're kind of down bad as an offense when it's like, what, Samaje Perine might really kill it in this situation. Let's move to the Detroit Lions, and this is going to kind of transition us into our look at the running back landscape here, because you nominated, and I think I agree with you here, that DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams are potentially both losers from free agency. So let's talk about the Lions fallout, both Swift back with the Lions and obviously what you can expect from Jamal Williams in New Orleans.
This really has to do with David Montgomery being an upgrade over Jamal Williams, and Jamal Williams getting all the opportunity that he did last year. David Montgomery is a lot more elusive. Like Jamal Williams is not an elusive back. He's more versatile than Jamal Williams, right? Mm-hmm. He can play in more situations than Jamal Williams, which means that, obviously DeAndre Swift, when he was on the field, he was running routes, he was getting targeted. And Jamal Williams was not, which means that situationally they were used differently. Now, David Montgomery coming in, he can run routes. He could, obviously, DeAndre Swift is lights out in that category, right? But David Montgomery is capable, a lot more capable than Jamal Williams. So a lot of those opportunities that would have definitely went DeAndre Swift's way could potentially go David Montgomery's way. Are there situations where David Montgomery might be on the field on third downs in specific pass blocking situations in certain passing downs? It is possible, right? And then that goal line role that you were hoping that, okay, Jamal Williams is going to be a free agent. He's going to leave. Maybe DeAndre Swift can be used near the goal line. Now you're bringing David Montgomery, who could potentially take that role over. Now, Jamal Williams, he had a ridiculous amount, of touchdowns, 33 carries inside the 5-yard line, which is absolutely ridiculous, dude. So I had a note. Yeah. The next highest was Zeke with 19. Okay, so this dude is unbelievable.
Bro, I was just looking up this today too, because I was writing about like some free agent winners and losers and stuff, and I was like, inside the 10-yard line, he has 45 carries. Number 2 is Mixon at 29. Like that's almost double. That's because I've said it a lot. You say it all the time. Like nobody's run hotter than Jamal Williams inside the 10-yard line, and then you look it up and you're like, oh my God, somehow it's even crazier than I thought.
That is a lot of attempts, man. And I'm pretty sure all of his touchdowns, except one, came inside the 5-yard line. So that tells you what you need to know. Because I was
14,
big on
14.
Amon-Ra St. Brown probably assisted him on like 10 of those touchdowns. I think that's probably what it was. But yeah, man, it's a situation where, it seems like this coaching staff just does not want DeAndre Swift to carry a big load. Obviously he's going to be used situationally like he was last season, but with Montgomery there, now this could be a very good 1-2 punch at the end of the day. Like if Swift can stay healthy, this could be a really, really good backfield. So I'm not discounting Swift's upside and his talent, but I just think that in terms of roles, I think he lost a little bit.
Where do you think DeAndre Swift would have to fall in drafts for you to be like, all right, that's where I'm clicking his name? Because I know for me, like if he goes anywhere where he went last year, which I don't think he will, it would be like an instant no thanks.
No, I think it would have to be probably fifth round, sixth round, maybe. And you know what? That might end up that might mean that I won't have any DeAndre Swift next year, right? Because
Yeah.
I like a lot of the wide receivers in that range as well. So we'll see where the value ends up settling. Like I've done a lot of best ball drafts so far, and I have taken Swift if I'm taking wide receivers relatively early, and there's a lot of value. So I'm okay in that type of format. But in season long, I'm really not sure what I'm going to be. I'm going to end up doing on Swift if he's going before the fifth round, or the fifth round itself. I think I'm probably going to be out.
Yeah, because I can see in a post like running back dead zone situation, we'll have to see where that actually settles. Like when drafts kind of crystallize a little more.
Yeah.
I could definitely see like, hey, I'll take the injury upside situation because we talk about Swift's injury history. Well, Montgomery's gotten hurt in the past too, and if he gets hurt, then I think we could really see a lot of passing game upside. And this is just a good ecosystem, which is why I think Montgomery's a winner, like we talked about in the last podcast, and Swift is definitely a loser for now because Montgomery's addition. But if Montgomery gets hurt, that could be really a big time role there. But Jamal Williams, I'm not sure that I think Jamal Williams is necessarily a loser, just because he could walk into a situation here where Alvin Kamara is suspended early. He's not. I tell you what, I think you and I both agree he ain't gonna have no 45 touches inside the 10-yard line. I think we'll take the under on that, but there's still potential like running mate opportunity here alongside Alvin Kamara, but you might be a little lower on Williams than I am.
Yeah, to be honest with you, all of his fantasy points came from touchdowns last year, right? And I just don't see it, right? Like he's not involved in the passing game. He's not a great runner. So that's really what it comes down to for me. And I don't know how long Kamara is going to be suspended. And I have a feeling that if the Saints think that Kamara is going to be suspended, if they have some sort of inkling that he's going to get suspended, I think they're going to hit the draft. I think they're going to get somebody
that's true.
Who is going to be, somewhat versatile and who could complement Jamal Williams, like, maybe someone like a poor man's DeAndre Swift or a poor man's Kamara, right? Somebody who can play on all three downs and, kind of be on the field on passing downs with Jamal Williams kind of carrying the load on early downs. So that's kind of how I'm looking at it. I'm looking at Taysom Hill, who's going to be vulturing touchdowns as well. And if Kamara's healthy, right, we might have a three-way timeshare at the goal line. So that's really my concern with Jamal from a fantasy perspective. I think he can still contribute from an NFL standpoint. I think he's a good running back, and I think he'll contribute in a positive way. I think this was a good signing for them. I just think from a fantasy perspective, if you're not really giving us anything in the pass game, in the receiving game, you better score a lot of touchdowns at the end of the day. Most of us play PPR now. So I think that's really what it comes down to for me.
Yeah, I agree. He's definitely, he's not going to have the same type of season that he did last year. There's obviously no chance of that, but I can squint and see a situation with the Saints where their offense is pretty decent because I love Chris Olave and Michael Thomas. We'll see what happens with Michael Thomas if he's up and ready to roll, but Derek Carr is not a bad addition. And I think this offense could be decent. And you look at Jamal Williams too. He was definitely just an early down back only with the Lions, but he did like play on passing downs earlier in his career with the Packers. So maybe that happens, but I don't think I'll be proactively, to steal a Scott Pianowski term, I don't think I'll be proactively drafting Jamal Williams this year. I'll just kind of see where he falls. All right, let's move to the running back landscape here, man. I've yapped a lot about like a cataclysmic shift that's about to happen at the running back position a lot when previewing free agency a few months ago. I wouldn't say that necessarily happened, because the big three stayed with their teams. They got franchise tagged in terms of Josh Jacobs, Saquon Barkley, and Tony Pollard. But we did get plenty of movement across the position in free agency. So let's try and get kind of a state of the state here in the backfields, because we still have the draft coming up. And as you mentioned, you look through this list. I went ahead and grouped every backfield into 4 categories. You go through this list and there's not a lot of like slam dunk landing spots for these potential rookies. So what that means for us is that things are going to get messy here they're a little messy right now, but they're bound to get even more messy here over the next few months after the draft happens.
Yeah, 100%, man. There are, a handful of teams where, you're kind of looking at it and you're like, they could draft a running back. They could draft a running back. And in this class, there aren't a whole lot of good versatile running backs. Obviously, I would say the top 3 running backs, Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan, obviously, Zach Charbonnet. I think those 3 guys are somewhat versatile. Obviously the top two, Charbonnet, we're not sure yet if he's like a really good pass catcher or not. He caught a lot of balls, but he wasn't amazingly efficient with it. So we're not sure what that translates to into the NFL. But there's not a whole lot of guys. Like I think most of the running backs after that, I would say the next 6 or 7 guys are really early down guys. Good runners, but early down guys. So that's what it really comes down to. I think a lot of these coaches, like I mentioned, Sean Payton, potentially the Saints as well, who want that versatile running back, might be waiting until day 3 potentially. I think one of the day 2 guys that could potentially go off the board is Kenny McIntosh, somebody who is okay on early downs in the run game, but is a very, very good receiving back, out of the backfield. So we'll see. It's going to be interesting because, in years past, we've seen more versatile backs in those middle rounds. So this is an interesting year for me, just because I don't think a lot of these guys are going to be coming, and those day 2 guys are going to be coming in and catching a lot of balls out of the backfield.
Yeah, this is good because you're definitely more familiar with the running back prospects than me right now, because I'm knee deep in receiver stuff. So if you've got like suggestions for potential team matches as we go through this list, definitely feel free to throw them out there. So like I said, I grouped every backfield in the NFL into 4 categories here. The first category, I'd call them free agent starter level moves that happened here. That is only 3 here, not very much. Rashad Penny with the Eagles, Miles Sanders with the Panthers, and then Raheem Mostert / Jeff Wilson were re-signed by the Dolphins. The Dolphins I still squint at as like a team that could add a back and potentially jump these 2 guys, and obviously the Eagles as well. But for right now, those are really the only 3 teams that I think something happened this offseason that is like, okay, this team has a new starter or brought back a starter here. The others I think are a little messy. Do you agree that those 3 are kind of clear-cut starters, at least for right now?
Yeah, for right now. Like I said earlier, I think that the Eagles, like, if they go into the season and say, like, okay, Rashad Penny's going to be our guy. If he gets hurt again, right, I just don't see them doing that, right? Like, I don't see them, they're a smart franchise. Like, they know what they're doing there, obviously. But at the end of the day, it's like, you're going to draft a running back, make sure that Rashad Penny has some sort of insurance. And maybe you go into the season, like, listen, the Seahawks, remember, they drafted Kenneth Walker, 2nd round.
Right.
They still went with Rashad Penny, right, to start the season. Like we didn't even see Kenneth Walker on the field before Rashad Penny got hurt. So, and Rashad Penny wasn't even, blowing the door. What's the phrase, Matt?
Blowing the doors off.
He was not blowing the doors off. Thank you, Matt. I appreciate it, man. Dude,
yeah.
So, but you know what I'm saying? Like there can easily be a day 2 running back that the Eagles draft, and maybe they end up going with Rashad Penny to start the season. Maybe they go with the rookie, but I don't think it's going to be him. Just on his own, on his lonesome, kind of going into the season.
Yeah, I agree. I think they'll definitely add someone, and it could be in a 2nd, 3rd round type situation. That guy's still a very attractive dynasty pick because Rashad Penny,
oh yeah,
he ain't gonna be here for a long time. He's just gonna be here for a good time. So that's really the deal with him. Second group here, these are running backs that don't have a new backfield mate, any competition that I think really moves the needle. Obviously, some of them are already in committees, but is what it is. And I count 21 guys in this group. Josh Jacobs, Tony Pollard, because I'm not counting Ronald Jones, Travis Etienne, Tyler Algier, Isaiah Pacheco, Cam Akers, Rashad White, Austin Eckler, of course, but, there's some stuff going on there. Saquon Barkley, the Packers back, Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon, Derrick Henry, Christian McCaffrey, J.K. Dobbins, Joe Mixon, Kenneth Walker, who you just mentioned, Brian Robinson, Najee Harris, Breece Hall, Nick Chubb, Jonathan Taylor, and James Conner. These guys are all right now theoretically safe, but I definitely see some names in here, and I'm curious if you could, a couple ones that stand out to you that like, okay, so, they're safe for right now, but like that cataclysmic, that meteorite's gonna come in and smack down in this backfield and could potentially shift things up here.
Yeah, one name that just popped out at me was Brian Robinson. Somebody who really wasn't too efficient. This was like Ron Rivera's guy, right? Like who just came in, just plowing on early downs. Like towards the end of the season, he did get a little bit better, a little bit more efficient for sure. Once he got his legs under him and all that. But at the end of the day, I think that with the enemy coming over, listen, I'm not an Antonio Gibson truther. I swear.
Yeah.
Okay. But if anybody is going to be the better fit in that style of offense, I think it's going to be Antonio Gibson, somebody who is a lot more versatile, a very good pass catcher, obviously former wide receiver. Let me know if you heard that before.
I've just a few times.
But I think, some like if they choose to just roll with those two guys as their primary backs, I do think that Antonio Gibson, that could potentially be more of a timeshare than we think, or potentially take the front seat in that backfield. So that's one that kind of stands out to me, as a backfield that, it might not go just like, how we saw it last season.
Yeah, Ron needs somebody to compare to Christian McCaffrey this offseason, because he's done it with JD McKissick before. He's done it with Antonio Gibson before. Like, he needs a pass catching back in the draft. I kind of think they're a sneaky Bijan Robinson team. Yeah. They're like kind of in the middle of the first round. If he gets there, they're just like, hey, we're going to take another running back, because they take a running back in like with a day 1 or day 2 pick all the time. We mentioned Brian Robinson, we mentioned Antonio Gibson. Like, they'll put resources into this position, this front office. They're a little more old school, and Ron Rivera is obviously old school. But I agree with you that I like Brian Robinson. He's a banger back, but I think I kind of think they're a little bit done with the Antonio Gibson thing. So to me, that signifies them as a potential team to take one in the draft. There's other guys on this list too, like we mentioned Joe Mixon. He could be on the move for sure. That could be a situation that shifts up there. Tyler Algier and Travis Etienne, Rachaad White, those three also stand out as guys that could definitely see another back added to the mix that really messes up their fantasy projection. Any of those guys stand out to you?
Those guys, I think Rachaad White, I think he I was a fan of him coming into the NFL, to be honest. Like, I thought that he was like a solid runner on early downs, but his pass catching skills just stood out to me like crazy. He was super efficient in college and had a ton of volume as well as a Sun Devil. But coming in, I was super excited when he got the opportunity. He didn't really impress me, to be honest with you. He was he was just meh in that offense. And, yards per route run, yards per catch, all the metrics that you're looking at from an individual perspective just wasn't really there. Didn't really pop off. And even just watching him, he didn't really pop. So I would not be surprised if the Bucs went ahead and, drafted somebody, who is a compliment, to Rachaad White. Now, Travis Etienne, on the other hand, like, obviously we've heard Doug Peterson talk about, having a couple of guys in that backfield. I don't know that there's going to be a back. I don't think they're going to prioritize the back like on day 1 or day 2. I think they have their guy. They could potentially grab somebody day 3 to, as like this early down back who could complement Travis Etienne. But I think they kind of have their guy. Like, he was really good last year, man. Like, he was super efficient. Yeah. He's a good running back, and I think they kind of have their guy in him. Who was the other guy that you mentioned?
Tyler Algier.
Yeah, Algier was really good last year, man. Like,
really good, yeah.
He was a good running back, and coming into the NFL, he was one of the top backs in yards after contact per attempt, and you kind of saw it coming a little bit, especially after his last year at BYU. So I personally think that this is going to continue to be a run-first team, and I would not be as surprised if they bring in another back to kind of replace Cordell Patterson, like to bring in a real running back. No disrespect to Cordell Patterson, but bring in somebody else to kind of complement Algier a little bit. I think I would agree with that.
Yeah, because I'm really just trying to find like who's the sneaky Bijan Robinson team, because you hear from NFL people that he's like top 5 on some team's board, which means at some point somebody's going to get itchy in the middle of the first round and like they'll just take the best player available. It's going to happen. And you look at Atlanta at 8, that's kind of aggressive, but Arthur Smith loves to run the ball. You never know. You can't rule that out. Tampa Bay at 19, Todd Bowles is definitely old school enough to be like, we're resetting our offense here with Kyle Trask. We definitely need another running back here. I could see that. I don't think but I'm with you. Like, Jacksonville at 24, just among the teams we're talking about, I don't see that one either. But
what about Isaiah Pacheco, man? Pacheco, obviously, it might not be Bijan. Could be Jahmyr Gibbs, though, right? Like, somebody. Listen, Pacheco. A great story, right? Decent year. I don't think he's the guy, though. I really don't. Like, he had a good year, solid running back, but I think that this is Andy Reid wants somebody. It's been way too long where we haven't had a legit pass catching running back coming out of this backfield, right? In an Andy Reid offense with Patrick Mahomes. I want to see it. Like, obviously, Jerick McKinnon was doing his thing. He's obviously not their future. But I think, getting someone like Jahmyr Gibbs would be absolutely amazing in this offense. So that's what I'm calling. I'm calling Jahmyr Gibbs to the Chiefs.
Okay, I like that. Isaiah Pacheco, I definitely think he could have like a little bit of the Super Bowl, hype on him, like deep playoff run. But man, I think he's not going away. I definitely think he could be like a post-draft loser, though, just like you're saying, with a potential pass catching back there. And even I don't think they want to use him on passing downs. They'll occasionally throw him like a slant because he's just such a big dude, get him in the open field. That's awesome. But I don't think he'll ever be a full pass catching guy. He just offered so much as a power rusher that this offense clearly needed, which is like why they won the damn Super Bowl. I think that was something that they needed the year prior, even the year before that. And they finally got him Pacheco, but still somebody else could be on the way here.
Which is why I like Gibbs there, because I think Gibbs is like a 15 to 18 touch guy. So like you can kind of, have Pacheco still work in pretty significantly on early downs.
Okay, third group here. These are running backs with a new face, but doesn't move the needle much. I've got 3 backfields here. Ramondre Stevenson, James Robinson was added there. Dameon Pierce, Devin Singletary was added there. And Javonte Williams, Samaje Perine, who we mentioned earlier, he was added there. And I want to read this tweet off that I saw earlier today from Parker J. Gabriel. Said that Sean Payton called Samaje Perine on the first day of free agency and said, basically, have you seen how I use running backs? Essentially, Perine said what it came down to was how upfront Denver was with me as far as playing time and what Coach Payton wants to do with me personally and what he wants to do as an offense. Talked about like the history of Saints running backs. Just like you did, I doubt he mentioned the PPR fantasy finishes of his backfield. But look at how much juice I've gotten out of backfields before. Samaje, you want to come with here? I think. How would you rank these in terms of the guys who move the needle for the current starter between Perine, Singletary, and Robinson?
I would say that none of these guys really move the needle that much. Now, I would say Samaje probably moves the needle the most, and not really because of Samaje, more because of Javonte Williams' ACL injury. He's coming off of that injury. So this kind of gives the Broncos like, a little bit of insurance, like, hey, you know what? We don't have to use Javonte that much. Now, if they didn't get a decent replacement, somebody who they feel comfortable, at least being on the field, like Samaje is just not going to make mistakes, right? Like he's a good running back. He's not going to, get on the field, fumble, miss blocks, that sort of thing. So he's that type of back. So I think, him being there, could make Sean Payton comfortable to not have Javonte Williams on the field as much. Now, Dameon Pierce, I think he had a really, really good rookie season, before he got hurt, obviously. Did fall off a little bit, but the fact that he was like getting it done like on that offense is super impressive. Especially, as a running back, honestly, his offensive line wasn't even that good. So like, I personally think that, Dameon Pierce, it's his backfield as of right now. This day 3 running backs, like they're never good bets, when it comes to fantasy and the long-term value. If I was the GM, like if you're talking about rational GMing, like you would hope that they just stick with Dameon Pierce and not waste, an early, day 2 pick on a running back. Just stick with what you got. And you got Devin Singletary, decent, RB2, I think, behind him. I don't think he's that great, to be honest with you. But I think that he's a decent, like kind of, I wouldn't even call him like a 1B. I would call him like a proper 2 behind Dameon Pierce.
I'm with you, man. I think I saw your post the other day on the old gram about, day 3 running backs. People should go and check that out. Like the history is definitely not a good bet that these guys can get. We're talking about James Robinson with the Patriots. He's a perfect example of this whole phenomenon. He was an undrafted guy, obviously. And yeah, Robinson, hope he makes the comeback, but guy couldn't get on the field for the Jets last year. So we'll see what happens. But Singletary, I'm with you that I think he is not like a 1B. I think he's just a straight up 2. In fact, I think he's kind of like a younger, potentially more explosive version of what they got out of Rex Burkhead last year. Like, I think they'll just plop him into that role. And obviously there were times where Burkhead was a slight fantasy annoyance for Dameon Pierce, but for the most part, I think it's mostly the Pierce show. There is the draft specter in the background, but like if the worst thing that's going to happen to Dameon Pierce this offseason is they add Devin Singletary to the backfield, I think it's a pretty big win if you have Dameon Pierce. We're on the same page there. That's a pretty big win.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think that'll be a win. I'm not 100% convinced that they're done there, because remember, this is a new coaching staff. We kind of don't know what they're going to do. Rex Burkhead role, quote unquote, doesn't really exist anymore because it's a new coaching staff. So we'll see what they do. I think what you're saying is that they could potentially put Devin Singletary on the field, third downs, passing downs, that sort of thing. That is very possible. So, but like you said,
change of pace, guy, basically.
If that's the case, I'm all over. I'll be all over Dameon Pierce this year.
Yeah, I think he's a tough guy to read from a dynasty perspective because, like you said, you got to look at the rational GMing thing. But for this year, if he manages to escape the draft with, like, even if they add a 5th round pick or something, like, who cares? I think it will still be the Dameon Pierce show.
Don't get me wrong. In Dynasty, I am selling. If I can get a first round pick for him, I'm doing it. Late first round, I'm
sure.
doing it. But and I've seen it happen. But in redraft, like if in redraft you have the luxury of waiting, right? Dynasty, you don't. You have to kind of make that call now whether you're going to keep him or not.
All right, 4th and final group here. I've got 5 guys, and this group is these guys might be in some trouble. And we've talked about some of them already, so we don't have to spend a ton of time here. Alvin Kamara, obviously they added Jamal Williams. I think that's a pretty big needle mover for Alvin Kamara, who's got a lot of other problems going on as well. We talked about DeAndre Swift, them adding David Montgomery. That's a little bit of trouble. Dalvin Cook, the Vikings brought back Alexander Mattison. I only think that this is a potential problem because I still think Dalvin Cook might be either on the trade block or could be, released, even though he's got an injury situation. Khalil Herbert, them adding Donta Foreman, that's not good. I think that's potentially the most problematic situation. And then James Cook, they added Damian Harris, and I love the Damian Harris signing. I'm not going to get crazy excited about Damian Harris because, he's still, I would say, a good back, not a great back, but potentially touchdown scorer, even though he's got to compete with Josh Allen there. I was really excited about this signing, and I think if you drafted James Cook in Dynasty last year, you were really excited about James Cook. I think there's a chance that we go this whole offseason and talk ourselves into Damian Harris so much, and then James Cook ends up still being really valuable and good in fantasy. But no doubt about it, objectively right now, Damian Harris signing there is a problem for James Cook. And all of these guys, like I said, I think they're in a bit of trouble right now.
I think it goes back to what we talked about with Devin Singletary, just him not being that good of a back, like that upper echelon. But Damian Harris is somebody, who on early downs, when he's healthy, when he's on the field, he's a pretty good running back, right? And when they get near the goal line, we talked about this before, like, the quarterbacks kind of switching their role near the goal line. Like when you said that, I was wondering about Damian Harris and Josh Allen, right? Like, do they kind of switch it up where, who did they have before, right? They had Zach Moss, they had Devin Singletary, they had James Cook. So it's like, who are you going to give the ball to at the goal line if you have Josh Allen? Now they have somebody they could potentially depend on in that backfield. Don't have Josh Allen take as many hits near the goal line. Give it to Damon Harris. Now, Harris has had issues staying on the field as well, like throughout his career. So, if you draft James Cook out of value because the Damian Harris hype gets, because I've already seen it on Twitter, dude, 20 touchdowns incoming for Damian Harris.
Yep, people are excited.
For sure. So, James Cook could potentially have games without Damian Harris this year. And in those games, we saw how efficient he can be when he's given, more than 15 touches. So I think that is still in the cards for James Cook with Damian Harris still there. I don't think this is, the Bills don't run the ball that much. Right. They really only run the ball when they get into a lead and they hop into 12 personnel, 21 personnel, and they start running the ball in the second half. But as of right now, I like both of these guys, with Damian Harris, like he's going to have to be, near the 10th round, totally. Around that, maybe a little bit later for me to pick him up because I know he's not going to be too involved in the passing game, even though coming out of college, like a while ago, I thought he could be a decent receiver, but Bill Belichick, but look at Ramondre, like Bill Belichick had no problem, involving Ramondre the way he did last season, but that's another story. But yeah, no, I think Damian Harris could potentially get double-digit touchdowns this year. So there, with that potential, I would be in on Harris if he's at the right price.
Yeah, look, I think that the reason we're talking about these guys is because this offense is good. And we want running backs tethered to an offense like this. Like that Khalil Herbert, Donta Foreman split, that's like, okay, they're split. I think the Bears offense can take a jump, but it's still probably not, it's not going to be as good as the Bills. And like they're splitting early down work. That's a messy situation. I can see this Bills backfield being cleanly split on the Bills offense, which would be great. I'm with you though, that Harris has to remain at like a reasonable ADP because like the hype is going to be out there. I've seen it as well. And I want to be in on Damian Harris, but like only to a certain extent, to the point that if Harris gets too steamed up, I could see myself going into James Cook because the durability concerns, the lack of passing game. But I actually think that the Harris thing, I've come kind of all the way around to thinking like this is a good signing, but I almost think it's better for the Bills in real life than it is for fantasy, just because they need a back to salt away games. Like you mentioned, they need to commit to a power run game. So I don't know. I'm definitely interested to see where he lands. But yeah, so these 5 backfields I think are still kind of TBD. But I think through our discussion here, Faraz, there's a lot of backfields that are a little still TBD here and could be messed up by the draft.
Yeah, 100%, man. Let me ask you a question though. Have the Bills found their running back? That's still an open question, man. They've been
I know, yeah.
signing running backs. They've been on the hunt forever, right? So if they listen, don't be surprised if they draft one, and
Yeah.
on day two, you never know.
I don't think like people are always trying to like people trying to get Breece Hall there last year. People are trying to get Bijan there at the 27th overall pick. I have no idea where Bijan's going to get drafted, and like I see it being one of those teams like Washington or Tampa Bay. Or even Atlanta, and just like ruins the young guys' prospects that you had great hopes for in Dynasty. I just envision that happening, but I don't think it'll be Buffalo. But I'm with you. They've drafted so many guys on like the second day of the draft. Like, I mean, I can't remember, was Singletary a 3rd round pick or a 4th round pick? But either way, like Moss was a day 2 pick, Cook was a day 2 pick. I could totally see them taking another guy there.
100%, man. I think listen, man. I made my call with Jahmyr Gibbs to the Chiefs. I think Bijan's going to end up Bijan's going to end up a Bengal.
That would be, if Mixon's obviously not on the roster, that would be like a godsend for the people who their dynasty team sucks enough to have the 1.01. Couldn't be me. Couldn't relate. But that would be a godsend for people like that. That would be absolute fireworks. So that's awesome. This entire episode was awesome. Faraz, that's going to do it for us. I really appreciate you joining me here, man. Tell the people out there where they can find all of your great work. I know you've got a ton of stuff going on with the podcast, like you mentioned, and everything on social and Instagram as well.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it. Upper Hand Fantasy over on Instagram. Shoot me a DM over there, and the Upper Hand Fantasy podcast on all podcasting platforms.
Yeah, I've seen you in the comments on your Instagram post. Like, you're out there really answering the people. Like, God bless you, man. You're doing the Lord's work. So definitely make sure you check him out. As I mentioned before, he is on Twitter, even if he's not, skulking around there as much as I am, which was just smart, by the way. That's a good thing. At Faraz Siddiqi on Twitter and at Upper Hand Fantasy on Instagram, as he just mentioned. That is definitely the place. Like, your graphics, dude, incredible. I mean, you're doing great stuff over there. So yeah, definitely make sure you check out the Upper Hand Fantasy on Instagram. And I'm at Matt Harmon _BYB on both platforms, but on my Instagram, don't be coming in my comments about fantasy questions. It's mostly like an occasional football video and like pictures of my dog. So that's the whole other thing. Of course, also make sure you're following at Yahoo Fantasy. I'm going to be back late Tuesday with a couple of special guests on a new draft focused format for the month of April. Stick around for that. See you then.